This story is based on a true incident shared by our Broccoli Fam subscriber, Eva. She had to deal with an evil colleague in the office who made her life a living hell. More on this incident after the story. The names have been changed in this story for personal reasons. In the history of God's creation, Martha had to be his most diabolical product. You could think of the most vile human to ever walk the earth, and Martha would give them a run for their money. It is how she was, how we all thought her to be. She smiled ever so sweetly, you would be tricked to think this spawn of the devil herself had any good in her being. She was fat in a way that made her look like a doll. Her cheeks were the size of 2 golf balls put together, and they were sometimes blush red from all of the rumors that she housed for her lips to speak. Malice, sabotage, cruel and damaging gossips that she would gain from all of us co-workers would be used to scuttle promotions and land anybody she fancied in trouble. And she never ever denied it. She simply looked her accuser in the eyes as though what they were saying did not concern her, and when they were done, she would be left alone. Once I had been a victim of her treachery. I had lost a project that would have taken my career to the next level because she had told the boss of my problems with my boyfriend and called me unreliable. A fabricated affair to boot with Dylan in accounting, and I was in hot water for a while. Still, I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge how this seemingly simple woman in her early 50s could decide to ruin people's lives without a qualm on her conscience. Megan had quit 3 months ago, giving the reason that her mental health was being threatened by such a toxic environment. Martha had quickly spread word around the office that Megan was weak, and it's why she couldn't cope. I also found out Megan's mother had cancer, and Megan did not make enough time to go see her mother because she was working so much. All from Martha's lips. I could not let Martha win, not after all she had done to us. I knew confronting her directly would land me in hot water, so I spoke to Dylan about it. "Damn, I hate that lady," he said with venom when I was done speaking. Then he asked what I thought we could do to her. My first thought was something totally crazy. My eyes betrayed me. Dylan caught my mood and he coughed to ease the tension. Then he stood up, went to his door, and shut it, so it was just me and him in his office. "She needs to feel pain," I said, voice trembling but resolute. Dylan sighed. "I have some friends," Dylan suggested. "No," I muttered. "It has to come from our hands, so she knows that being an ass has its consequences." "Judith, it's a lot of risk," Dylan replied. I was not going to negotiate it, and Dylan told me he'd set something up. Dylan's plan went into effect about a fortnight after our conversation, and I noticed Martha looked like a shadow of herself. I scarcely ever spoke to her since the incident, but her forlorn eyes and her shaken demeanor was too good to deny myself of the knowledge of her pain. For some reason, I asked her about it before speaking to Dylan. "Nothing," she answered me, her meticulously crafted mask of kindness cracking as her confidence faltered. Dark circles under her sagging eye bags informed me of her trauma. Dylan confessed to me what he had done, and it made sense why Martha was so scared. He had hired a masked man to torture her at night for the whole weekend. The thought of her time counting down sent her into a hellhole of fear, and soon her work began to suffer. I relished her suffering. I enjoyed the look of utter despair in her eyes when she could not complete the basic work that she ought to be doing before we started our vengeance. I basked in the dismay in her eyes when I asked how she was doing, and she said she was doing fine. To hear her tone break as her reality collapsed into a nightmare gave me so much thrill that I told Dylan that we should be wary about wearing her out. Dylan agreed, and we made arrangements to bring her one final but decisive moment of horror. The perfect opportunity was presented one evening when Martha stayed late at the office to finish a task. We stayed back after everyone had left, and Dylan cut the light to the building from the ground floor, throwing the building into pitch blackness. We used the reserve energy from the elevator to get back to the office floor and then slipped into the office area stealthily. Martha remained at her seat, with a desk lamp that cast a pale glow as she typed furiously, trying to salvage her crumbling world. I slipped in through the main entrance, and I sensed her faint rhythmic tapping stop at once, breaking her concentration. The air froze, and tension caused sweat to break from the pores at the back of my neck. Dylan, who was with me, marched delicately towards the office, and in the darkness we watched her struggle, her breath hitching as terror overcame her. Is someone there?" she called out into the empty space. "Martha," Dylan whispered low. "Please, not again. Not here. What have I done to you?" she mewed. "I will kill you this time," I recited without qualms, reducing my voice to a faint whiff that was unrecognizable even in my own ears. She spun around and scrambled out of her seat in sheer horror. She cried as she raced past us in the corners where we had hidden, aiming for the elevator. The elevator beeped open from its reserve energy, and she entered. The elevator mustered a slow, whirring noise, and the lights from the contraption flickering as the machine droned slowly from a lack of electricity. Panic set in as the floor was now totally pitch black. She tapped frantically at the emergency button, screeching violently for pity. "Please, whoever you are, I'm begging," Martha sobbed. She threw herself at the wall of the elevator and slid to the ground. "Say your final prayers, Martha," Dylan droned. Martha raced out of the open elevator, and she stumbled on her face, knocking her head against the floor. As quickly as she fell, she was once again on her feet, rushing out towards the stairs. She screamed loud as she ran, chased by her own fright. Her voice was lost in the night, and even though we didn't harm her physically, we knew that the lesson we had taught her was one that she would live with for an eternity. Not surprisingly, Martha's desk was cleared out when I resumed work the next day, and no one questioned her sudden resignation. The office was lighter, and the mood was brighter from then onwards. Eva told me via email that her evil office colleague could go to any lengths and do anything to safeguard her interests and put everyone else in the office down, especially the people she didn't like. Now, in the real incident, they did not scare away Martha, but the HR was shown some damning evidence of Martha's wrongdoing. Thankfully, Megan has rejoined the office, and things are better now. This story is inspired from a true incident shared by one of our Broccoli Fam subscribers, Henry. We have changed the name of the characters in the story for personal reasons. More on this incident after this story. Her cough was unending, dragging phlegm through the dry passageway of her throat. I would watch her as the aqueous matter pulled up from her esophagus. She only stopped once she had trapped the phlegm in her mouth. Then she would allow it to stew into a pool in her mouth for a moment before swallowing. "It's a sinus infection," Linda would say to me, as though it was supposed to make the experience any less disgusting. It annoyed me greatly, and I would feel my fist ball up. To relieve myself, I would shut my eyes until my balled-up fist eased into the moment. Then I would pick myself up from my seat, no matter how neck-deep in work I was, because frankly, I could not stand the sight of her. 10 months of such torment, and my loathing simmered, burning intensely with each instance of her constant coughing and swallowing. My grated nerves, despite my own affirmations of being above petty grievance, received fresh wounds when she did it near me. 10 months was a long time, and it was only so much skin that could be scraped off before the flesh bleeds. The incident threw me over the edge happened at the coffee dispenser one cold winter afternoon. I had been working on my report for the month and had been buzzed for the work ahead of me, fetching my cup of coffee as I struggled to keep the data in my head from distraction. I mouthed some of the data too. I had not seen her walk up to the coffee dispenser beside me. Perhaps if I did, I would have managed my emotions better. She had materialized behind me like a specter and announced herself with the sound of her cough. I was so startled that I shook, and it affected my own reconciliation of the data I had struggled to remember. Linda stared at me sheepishly. "Are you all right, Adam?" she asked with a mouthful. I spun around, and there she stood, with her phlegm in her mouth just before she swallowed. Rage mixed with disgust was a potent fuel, and my hand left my side before I could consider restraint. My slap sent her tumbling to the ground. Realizing what I had done, I quickly apologized and tried to help her up, but Linda was furious, and we had company in a blink. She explained that I had slapped her, and in an out-of-body experience, I tried to apologize to her and all the accusing eyes on me. Not a word of what I said in apology saved me from the sack on grounds of assault. "You're lucky she's choosing not to take up criminal action against you," Marty, the HR guy, said to me. But it did not matter. I resented her. She had tortured me for 10 months, and finally had destroyed my career. It was an evil, despicable fate to suffer, and with each passing day that I allowed myself to spiral in the thought, I felt an urgent darkness overwhelm me, pushing me towards revenge. I needed her to feel my pain. The pain of something being taken away from her by no fault of her own. I found Dr. Blake, who was willing to perform any surgical procedure for the right price. Dr. Blake was very much like me in the predicament. He had been disgracefully discharged from being a surgeon for a minor oversight, and he wanted to get his lick back at society. Convincing him to fix her was no difficult task. I did the rest of the work of figuring out how to break into her apartment. A small house with 2 rooms, furnished to cater to her single taste. We stepped into the house as quietly as we could, and tried to figure out which of the rooms she was in. Perhaps it was our faint whispers and the soft rustling of our feet through the house that woke her up, but she soon came out of one of the rooms, stumbling through the bleak lighting in the house. I adjusted my eyes to the light spilling through the cracks of the blinds. Who's there?" she inquired in a shaky voice as she stepped forward, fearing a nightmare that had breached reality. I could sense her terror, and for some reason it made me feel powerful. "She lives alone?" Dr. Blake whispered to me. I turned to him and nodded. His face was obscured by the surgical mask on his face, and his gloved hands glinted under the faint light. My lips curled in a vengeful smirk. I was really doing it. Linda coughed gruffly, and I was transported back to that raw feeling of annoyance that her coughing stirred in me. "I will call the cops," she declared as she maneuvered the blackness without trying to find us. It pissed me off in the darkness where I had hidden with Dr. Blake. Half expecting her to move towards us, I was surprised by the brisk movement of Dr. Blake from my side. The shock seized the breath from my lungs. He was quick, and before Linda could scream out in terror, his cold hand clamped over her mouth. My heart thundered, and the deafening rhythm matched the rush of panic that flooded my veins. My eyes darted to the room, wide and desperate, looking for a way to approach her without being recognized. The room was dark enough, I assumed, so I moved in to assist Dr. Blake. "This will only take a moment. Try not to move." Dr. Blake spoke in a calm, detached tone as though discussing a routine procedure. A cold chill ran down my spine as her terror escalated. She thrashed violently against our grip, her muffled cries drowned out by the sound of duct tape being torn from the roll. Dr. Blake was surgical with his process, and soon she was bound up, hands and feet. "Don't fight it." Dr. Blake's voice sounded like a venomous whisper as he held up a syringe filled with a liquid shimmering ominously in the dim light. "This will numb the area." With that, he administered the syringe. The needle plunged into her neck, and the sting caused her to shriek through the duct tape on her mouth. Linda shook her head violently, and the tears streaming down her face satisfied my urge for revenge. "Oh," Dr. Blake muttered. "What is it?" I asked. She shook, and my needle punctured her vocal cord," he lamented. She heard it, and I saw a deathly fright in her eyes overcome with fear. "I don't care," I scoffed. The futility of her struggle fulfilled me. I watched her take breaths into her lungs with heaving gasps until she was immobile as the injection took its effect on her. Wordlessly, Dr. Blake laid out his instruments on a towel spread on the floor. The cold steel of his scalpel glinted in the light as Dr. Blake positioned himself over her. His first incision was sharp and precise, carving a fine line along her throat. The horrifying pressure of the blade slicing through every tissue made me smile. I could feel her mind, unconscious but awake, struggling through a cacophony of pain. Her body screamed for escape, but the numbing agent dulled her muscles as it did her voice. Trapped, immobile and utterly powerless, the sickening noise of her flesh parting under the cold blade of Dr. Blake's instrument would haunt her for life, I was sure, and it made me happy. We worked on her for about 3 hours, and Dr. Blake was finally done. He stitched her up, and we left her to recover, knowing that she may never speak again. I wrote a note on her table for when she would wake up, and planned my escape away from where she would ever reach me. "Now you will understand what it's like to suffer in silence." Well, in the real-life incident, Henry did not break into the house of his colleague. But he did try to raise a complaint against her to HR and the boss. Henry told me that the worst part was that in spite of his complaints, no action was taken against the woman because in the last 2 months, 2 of the people in his team had resigned due to work pressure from the boss. Due to this, the boss was on the back foot. Poor Henry kept on suffering for another 6 months before he could manage to get transferred to another department within the same company.
This story is inspired by a true incident submitted by one of my subscribers named Ryan. He used to work as a gym trainer. More of the incident after the video. When I first met Mark, he seemed like the kind of client every trainer dreamed of. Eager, motivated, and ready to make a change. He reached out online, paid up front for an 8-week program, and explained his goals in meticulous detail. He wanted to shed 30 pounds, build muscle, and get his life back on track. I'd seen transformations before, and with his determination, or so I thought, I believed that he could do it. The first week was about assessment and planning. We scheduled a Skype session where I evaluated his form on basic exercises. I created a customized workout plan that fit his busy schedule and wrote a detailed meal plan with the low-calorie recipes tailored to his tastes. I even calculated his macros and gave him a calorie limit to stick to. Mark seemed thrilled. "I've never had someone take so much time with me," he said, smiling into the webcam. "I won't let you down." By week 2, cracks began to show. Each day I checked in with him. "Hey man, how's your diet today? Did you get into the gym?" And day after day, his responses grew more disappointing. "Oh, I was too busy," he'd text back. "Work was insane today, so I just stayed home. Needed energy for a late meeting, so I grabbed pizza." By week 3, I was frustrated. I knew life would be chaotic, but Mark's excuses began to feel hollow. Still, I didn't want to give up on him. I set up another call to discuss adjustments. "Look, Mark," I said, trying to sound encouraging. "I know life's hectic, but we can figure this out. How can we make this easier for you?" He sighed and rubbed his face. Honestly, I've got more important things to worry about besides going to the gym, he muttered. That should have been my cue to walk away, but I didn't. Instead, I spent hours revising his plan to make it even simpler. I thought I was helping. I had no idea what I was really getting into. A month into the program, I noticed something strange. A friend of mine, Jessica, who also trained clients online, mentioned a new guy she was working with. His name was Mark, she said. He's paying top dollar for meal plans and daily check-ins. Seems serious about his goals, but he always seems full of excuses. My stomach sank. Is he from New York? I asked. Yeah, why? I didn't say anything at first. It felt absurd, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the same Mark. I asked her to show me a picture, and sure enough, there he was, the same guy, grinning sheepishly in his profile photo. He had been working with both of us simultaneously, but why? It wasn't like he was following either of our programs. I decided to confront him. Mark, I said during our Skype call, are you working with another trainer? He didn't even flinch. Yeah, I've been consulting with a few different people, he said casually. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal? I snapped. You're paying for customized programs that you're not even following. What's going on here? He shrugged. It's my money. Don't worry about it. Something about his tone made my skin crawl. He wasn't just lazy or unmotivated. There was something deeper at play, and I didn't press further. Not yet. A week later, Jessica called me in a panic. You won't believe this, he said. I just found out Mark's been selling our meal plans online. He's repackaging them and claiming they're his. What? I couldn't believe it. But when she sent me the link, there it was, a sleek website advertising Mark's Ultimate Fitness Guides. He'd taken our work, slapped his name on it, and was selling it for $50 a pop. Furious, I confronted him again. You're stealing from us, I said. Do you have any idea how unethical this is? He smirked. Calm down, you're not losing anything. You've already been paid. That's not the point. It's our work. You can't just take it and profit off it. Watch me, he said, his smirk widening. I couldn't let it go. I started digging into Mark's background and quickly discovered he had a history of scamming people. He'd been involved in several get-rich-quick schemes, promising investment returns that never materialized. One woman even sued him after losing her life savings. Jessica and I decided to take action. We gathered evidence and contacted a lawyer, but before we could file a case, something unexpected happened. Mark disappeared. At first, I thought he'd gone quiet to avoid legal trouble, but then his website went down. His phone number stopped working, and his social media accounts vanished. It was like he'd erased himself overnight. A month later, I got a call from a detective. Are you Jason Cole? He asked. Yes, how can I help you? We're investigating a case involving Mark Hughes. You were one of his trainers, correct? Yes, I said, my heart pounding. What's going on? Mark was found dead in his apartment last week. We're trying to piece together what happened. I was stunned. Dead? How? The detective wouldn't share many details, but he mentioned that Mark's death was being treated as suspicious. Apparently, he'd been involved with some dangerous people, and his deeds had finally caught up with him. The real incident happened around 5 years back. Ryan used to work as a professional gym trainer and nutritionist. In order to expand his client base, he started offering his services online. For personal reasons, we changed the name of the client to Mark. Mark made a lot of sales by copying the fitness meals and plans and selling them on his own. Once a lot of people complained, Mark disappeared, leaving no trace online. This story is inspired from a true incident submitted by our subscriber, Noah. In all of his years of working as a trainer, he had never encountered something so bizarre, as weird as the red guy. The first time I noticed him, it was hard not to stare. A guy in a red hoodie, hood up, strings loose, completely obscuring his face except for the faint shadow of his nose, strode into the gym like he owned the place. It wasn't his presence, though. It was what he did once he got there, and made him impossible to ignore. Every evening at exactly 7 p.m., like clockwork, he'd step onto the treadmill. Not just any treadmill either. He had a specific one. the second one from the left closest to the mirrors. It was an unspoken rule. The treadmill was his, and everyone seemed to know it. I'd seen a couple of newbies try to use it earlier in the day, only for the regulars to warn them off with a whisper and a nod towards the clock. No one wanted to cross the guy with a red hoodie. He'd start at a moderate pace, maybe 6 miles per hour, easing into it like any other jogger. But within the first minute, he'd crank it up to 8, then 9, then 10. And then he'd go full tilt, legs pumping like pistons, arms swinging in perfect rhythm. You might think he'd huff and puff, struggle to keep the speed, but no. The man didn't even break a sweat. His breathing stayed steady. His posture never wavered. He was like a machine. And then, just as I'd start to think, okay, maybe he's just a really fit guy with insane cardio, he'd start to air guitar. It was subtle at first. A twitch of his fingers, a slight tilt of his head, but within those moments, it became a full-on performance. His hands moved over the invisible fretboard with startling precision, fingers sliding and strumming like he was channeling Jimi Hendrix himself. His head bobbed in time with the inaudible beat, long, exaggerated nods that turned into outright headbanging. His hood would flop forward and backwards with each motion, but he never stopped. His pace on the treadmill never faltered. 30 minutes of this, half an hour of blistering speed, relentless air shredding, and silent, furious rocking out. And then, just as abruptly as he'd started, he'd stop. No cool down, no walk. He would just hit the stop button, step off the treadmill, and stride outside of the gym without a word to anyone. Not a drop of sweat on him. Not a single strand of hair out of place. The first time I thought maybe he had headphones under the hoodie, blasting some high-octane playlist. But when I caught a glimpse under the hood one evening, there was nothing there. No earbuds, no over-ears, just his intense, focused expression and eerie silence that hung around him like a shroud. The regulars just called him Red, partly for the hoodie, partly for the aura of mystery he carried. Everyone had their theories about him. He's training for a marathon, one guy suggested. Maybe he's in a band, another chimed in. The wildest theory came from Karen, the woman who ran the front desk. He's a ghost, she whispered one night, her eyes darting towards the treadmill. I've never seen him check in, and he doesn't have a membership. He just appears. At first I laughed it off, but the more I watched him, the less certain I became. Red never interacted with anyone. He never spoke, never lingered, never broke his routine. It was like he existed in his own little world, completely detached from the rest of us. One night after he'd left, I went over to the treadmill he always used. I wanted to see if there was some clue or sign of, I don't know, something. But the machine was clean. No fingerprints on the console, no scuffs on the belt. It was like he hadn't been there at all. The last time I saw him was a Thursday. Just like always, he came in at 7 p.m., took his spot on the treadmill, and started his bizarre ritual. But something was different that night. His movements were sharper, more frantic. His headbanging was almost violent. His air guitar shredding more aggressive. It was like he was fighting against something invisible, something only he could hear. I wanted to approach him to ask if he was okay, but something held me back. Maybe it was the intensity of his posture, the wildness in his invisible performance, or maybe it was the way the room seemed to grow colder the closer I got. And then, just as suddenly as he started, he stopped. But this time, he didn't walk out. He just stood there, staring at the mirror in front of him. For a moment, I thought I saw his reflection move out of sync with his body. Just a fraction of a second, like he skipped frame in a video. My breath caught in my throat, but before I could say anything, he turned and walked away. That was the last time anyone saw Red. He never came back, and no one seemed to know where he'd gone. Karen swore she'd seen him in the reflection of the gym's front window one night, but when she turned around, no one was there. I've been a trainer for years, and I've seen all kinds of people. The dedicated, the lazy, the eccentric. But Red was something else entirely. To this day, I still can't explain what I saw or why he was there. All I know is every time I passed that treadmill, I half expected to see him again. Hoodie up, shredding on his invisible guitar to a song that only he could hear. This incident happened 2 years back at the gym where Noah used to work as a trainer. He told me that even though a lot of time had passed, he still thinks about Red, especially that particular evening.